So before I start off, I do have kind of like a small announcement. Is that this is gonna be kind of like the last vlog that I'm uploading before I'm going to vacations. And so there's gonna be kind of like this high chance that for a couple of weeks I'm not gonna upload kind of like anything because, well, I want to concentrate on relaxing, getting in touch with my family and all that stuff. But I say it's kind of like a small chance because probably I might gonna see a movie over there, and if I get kind of like giving myself the chance to make a vlog over there, I will do it. Although it's not kind of like guaranteed that I'm gonna do the usual thing because again, the vlogs that I don't do it for for any profit or attention or anything. Let's say that this is just a hobby that I do and I just like to share my thoughts about it and just kind of like that's it. But either way, with that in mind, I will say that after during these couple of weeks there wasn't technically kind of like a big movie that kind of got me interest to see right away because oh my god, I just have to watch this movie or something like that. Nothing that kind of caught my attention except today's subject. I was really anticipating this movie ever since it was announced, ever since it got the trailer, and I've been hearing a lot of hearsays that saying that this movie was really good. And that movie is none other than Good Boy. For some reason, it kind of sounds like kind of like a spin-off sequel with to the Macaulay Culkin movie called The Good Son. But no, it's not that. Good Boy it is promoted as the horror movie that, for the most part, is going to be on the perspective of a dog, which in itself on paper the idea is refreshing and. It is refreshing that that usually horror movies, they try to explore kind of like new ideas of sometimes some perspective of something here and there. What was it? Last year we had this movie. You know what? I forgot the name of the movie, but it was kind of like this on the perspective of the killer monster. It was the movie that it was like this Jason Voorhees kind of character that wakes up and most of the time the camera follows that creature for the most of the time, not all the time. I will tell you right away that I didn't watch that movie right away. But I did saw it when I got my monthly subscription on Shudder. And by the way, yes, I'm gonna get Shudder eventually because I am planning to watch that new VHS movie, which whether it has its ups and downs, I still love movie anthologies. Horror anthologies is kind of like one of my weakest points. I love this is kind of my favorite genres of horror movies. I mean, last night I also watched the Twilight Zone movie, and it was a big treat. But that movie with the Jason Voorhees kind of character, I do admit that movie personally it sucked. I really didn't like that movie. It was boring. It's overpraised and didn't even kind of like deserve it. The idea was there, I like it, but unfortunately there were kind of like once or twice that this idea gets dropped, and then it has one of the worst ending executions that I have seen in a while, in which basically it drops the whole following the monster thing, and then we get kind of like this pointless 10 minutes of kind of like the survivor talking with some random stranger, kind of, because I don't know, I think that stranger was kind of like a popular actress or something like that, and they just kind of spend talking about something that doesn't feel like it fits to the movie, and then it ends. So I was like, huh? So yeah, that's the gist of it, and not that saying that that if you don't like, if you like it, is bad or something like that. No, because at least I kind of praise what it tried to do. So with that kind of like in perspective, this is why I also have my usual cautionary perception on Good Boy, and of course I think that I was a little bit also skeptical because movies that centers on dogs are not always kind of like good. I had kind of like this stigma that most of the time movies with dogs, they always try to how can I say, make them seem like kind of like the best thing in the world, or sometimes they make it so cheesy that it becomes kind of like sappy. I mean, last year we have I had to deal with the Arthur the King, that garbage movie. But I'm also gonna admit also that there is also, sorry that I say that, I repeat myself because I'm just putting my train of thoughts right now. I have to admit that this movie was also prematurely ruined a little bit for me. But it's not the movie's fault. It's the fault of probably other people's perception, and then this stupid journalist that I don't know what kind of journalist it was, but let's say that people are always complaining that the problem with animals in horror movies is that they always get killed because they always want to, because it is kind of like a tool to showcase that the killer or the monsters or the ghosts are inhumane, and they always have to, they always strike the weakest of their link, and that is the dog, of course, or the cat, or any animal, mostly dogs and cats. So people kind of begin to making assumptions, saying that, oh my god, the dog will die, please don't let the dog die, or something like that, because honestly, yeah, the dog was gonna die, but then this stupid journalist, somehow he ruins the whole premise of the movie, and you know what, I'm not gonna say exactly what, but honestly, the way I said it was, it's gonna say, hey, don't worry, blah, 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 and he basically, again, ruined the movie, and I was like, dude, shush, you ruin it, you totally ruin it, because here's the thing, whether the dog will live or will die on the movie, it doesn't matter, because that's called storytelling. Whether someone lives or dies, it doesn't have to depend if, like, for example, if he's a dog or a cat. If it survives or not, that depends on how it is. And when you ruin something like that, you technically make the biggest cardinal sin of movie making, and movie promotion, and that is spoiling. That's spoiling. Even if how can I say, you can find the whole thing predictable. Spoiling the movie too, especially when you have the power of journalism, is a big no-no. So this guy kind of ruined a little bit my expectations to Good Boy, because it's a shame. Because I went there, and people were right. That movie was actually really good. Good Boy was really good boy, a totally good boy. I have kind of like a little bit problems here and there, but you know what? This is this is a movie that, despite that, it does have a little bit of a basic premise and tension and mostly cinematography. There's a lot of humility on how it was built, especially when you watch how the kind of like the production behind it. Funny thing is that I got rewarded this time that by sitting on the movie theater, even after the credits, we got a little bit of a snippet of the director talking about how they made the movie, why he feels appreciative that we watched this movie on the big screen, and it rightly deserving so. First, there's a lot to admire on this movie. That it's something of kind of like a lost kind of like a lost art, that it is, how can I say, it's lost in a way of how you portray these kind of movies, where it's not just a horror movie, but also kind of became also a tribute to animals in acting. Because right at the get go, this is the most admirable thing that I admired, that this movie has no CGI animals. Everything is with a dog, and just one dog. Which normally, when they use real animals, they usually pick kind of like the two or more animals in order to take the place. Like, for example, the cat from A Quiet Place from last year, it was played by two cats. This one they used only one dog. Although there were some scenes that they used a fake dog, but it's kind of like a dummy or something like that. But because of training a dog, it's not easy, especially when they have kind of like it has a kind of like a behavior or something like that. It can't keep still, so they have to deal the whole thing. And I've been hearing that this was 3 years in the making kind of movie, that the director felt passionate and decided to make a story out of it, and a lot of things kind of like work. So here I am talking about it. So let's start off. Of course, the story is pretty much as simple as you can get. It's about this dog. The dog is named Indy. Funnily enough, the dog named Indy, take two things. One, that's also the name of the real dog. The dog actor is called Indy, and the dog protagonist is called Indy. And two, if you are thinking about it, yes, when you hear a dog named Indy, it's basically kind of like it's basically making a reference to Indiana Jones, because remember that Indiana Jones gets his nickname because he fell fond with the dog that they named it Indiana Jones or something like Indiana. So Indiana Jones is like, okay, I'm gonna take the word Indiana. Although I think the Indiana Jones dog was a Malamute, I think, and our protagonist is kind of like a Danish golden retriever. Not an expert, but it's basically kind of like a golden retriever from Danish or something like that. I investigated, but the breeding was a little bit too long for it. So yeah, the dog name is Indy, and it has a close relationship to his owner, with this guy he's very nice, everything. He has a sister, but unfortunately, this guy has he has a terminal disease. It doesn't specify what it is, but some resources like Wikipedia call it he has a lung disease. I thought that he had some kind of cancer or tumor or something like that. But the point is that the guy is sick. He's terminally ill, and that is that until he decides to go to this house, almost away from almost in the middle of nowhere, kind of like a cabin in the woods that basically it belonged to his grandfather, something like that. He just wanted to stay there. Well, I think it doesn't specify. I don't know if I didn't pay much attention, but specifically he just wanted to find a place so he could be at peace and everything. And he goes there with the dog, and there's nobody except somewhere there's kind of like the groundskeeper or some other guy who he just there. He hunts and all this stuff. He hunts foxes, but basically he's there to settle down. Even though there are rumors that this house is haunted, there's bad things kind of happening. There are allusions that the grandfather over there he died of some kind of like paranormal causes, and well, as much as it sounds like this is kind of like a haunted house movie, it's more a kind of the movie trying to play it in with the I don't know if it's a fact or hearsay. I can't say it is 100% out of it, but for the sake that to believe that it's a fact, a lot of people said that animals have that tendency to sense the paranormal. They usually you know that sometimes they have kind of like this odd, fascinating feeling that probably dogs are more susceptible to ghosts, to paranormal, to a lot of things that are happen. Well, we can't say that it is 100% confirmed. It is kind of like an oddity that it feels fascinating in it. So the movie decided to play with that, in which using the perspective of the dog, he just kind of like watched that something is off. The dog usually sees kind of like that shadow somewhere, or something that is kind of crawling around the house, and the dog it just watches, but for the most part he's just there to defend his owner, because he and the owner, they both have kind of like this endearing relationship. You can tell that there is a big friendship. It shows them, of course, even at the beginning of the movie, how they bonded, how the dog was adopted, and they play along, and the dog, how he gets really happy when the owner has to get out. He gets out of the hospital for his checkups and all this stuff, and for the most of the movie, just following these two characters, and both are great. Even talking about the dog, that despite the tricks of cinematography that he did, the dog as an actor really does its job. I mean, well, let's say that they use their tricks to make the dog act believable, at least in the sense that it kind of acts like the faithful dog that we always want to imagine how it is, in which it sees something. And despite that, animals are not exactly as facial expression like human does. Just the fact that they use the cinematography to convey what is the dog's train of thoughts on what is happening. You can tell when the dog is happy, when the dog is worried, when the dog is afraid, when the dog is hungry, when the dog is feeling that he doesn't want to lose the owner, because there's something kind of like there's something that is gonna get that owner, but it doesn't know how to convey, and especially when the owner is like, I don't know, or something like that. It's not like he's kind of like 100% oblivious, just like all these typical stories here, like, oh lassie, you dunce, or oh curse the cowardly dog, you dunce, or something like that. No, nothing like that. As for also the other actors and the other characters, they also do their job. I will say that even the guy who who plays the owner. I don't remember the name of the owner or something like that, but he was also really selling his material. Despite that, there is kind of like a very limited moments in which you can see his face. It doesn't. His face can be shown, but for the most part, since we know that the main focus is about the dog, this is why most of the humans, actually all the humans for the most majority of the movie, we don't see their faces. They show them, but in only some certain selected moments. But for the most part, we don't see their face, but we can still see how he communicates with the dog. And I found that a little bit clever because we're here mostly to see the dog, and taking away the facial expressions of the humans, it kind of directs the audience to focus on the emotions of the dog more than the humans. Even though they have to rely more on their body language, and it shows. In the case of the owner, he's a guy who, well, for the sake of trying to not spoil too much about the movie, let's say that he's a guy who is coming in terms with his mortality, and of course he, in a sense that he's not kind of like dying of natural causes. He was basically kind of like a fairly young man who he finds out that he's gonna kick the bucket by an illness that he had to fight during his whole, almost most of his life, and kind of comes up into that kind of desperation, and his grief, his desperation, his how can I say, his thoughts. It also reflects on how the dog gets worried, and to the point that the guy, in a way, kind of loses a little bit his marbles now. But don't get me wrong. It's not like he loses his marbles. For example, saying or something like that. No. Let's say that the way he degrades, it's almost like if he was infected with the T virus, and he knows that someday he's gonna turn into a zombie. That's the best way I can describe it. Although there were some other character, like for example, I already told you about the groundskeeper, who he's there kind of like the only quote unquote support of the to the characters, despite his limited thing. But he was more kind of saying for just kind of to showcase some kind of element that happens later in the movie. And of course, there is the sister. The sister actually know that her name is Vera because she basically doesn't appear anywhere into the movie except the ending, because she's the sister of the guy who she talks, she's worried, she's always on the phone, and she's also kind of like she's also shows that she's basically suffering as much as the brother is going through. But of course, this is mostly about the dog. And this is where I go with the cinematography, where it was kind of like what was it? The movie did explain that it tried to make it kind of like what was it? There was a name of a technique in which he described, for example, in a movie that you can put a person in kind of like with a neutral expression, but as long as you superimpose kind of like an image of, for example, a plate and then a coffin, you can tell the character's feelings just by the elements that is put into. And this is what they use with the dog, in which I already explained that that they use cinematography. They make us believe what the dog is thinking by the environment and the objects that are there, without relying that animals usually have kind of these very limited facial expressions. And although in this, I will say that the movie does indeed looks murky. It looks dark, but it is clear enough to let you know when things when to look eerie, bleak, and it's scary. I will say it does have some scary stuff. I will say. But that brings me a little bit of a negative to this movie, but not for the sake of being mean. It's just to not overhype the movie, in which, because we have to, there is very limited of what you can do with a dog and its way of communicating. The movie sometimes rely a little bit too much on sequences that are either a fake moment or a dream sequence. They're kind of like this moment in which the dog sees something scary. Then, for example, sees kind of like a doppelganger of the dog or something like that. Or sometimes the dog sees something, then kind of something creepy like and then the next scene we just see the dog either waking up from a nightmare, or the dog is going through, okay, that happened. It kind of overly relies a little bit of that. Although in this case, I think I can give it a pass, considering the kind of movie that it wanted to be. And that also leads me kind of like the description of the quote unquote monster or the ghost, in which most of it, I will say that it's kind of like shadows. I'll say it's kind of like a humanoid shadow. But when you kind of get into kind of like perspective, is the monster usually showcase kind of like this big oily hand, and I gotta admit that is kind of like creepy in itself. I'm not gonna reveal exactly what the monster is, but the way it was executed is clever, and once you see it makes sense. But either way, this creepy hand is kind of like a thing of nightmare. You don't need to see much of it. It's just that hand that which comes out of nowhere. It gives you the creep, or sometimes kind of like the shadows, this oily being that is disturbing. It actually had kind of like 2 jump scares that thankfully it's not used kind of like orchestral strings or something like that, even though some of the music kind of said something like that. But I will say there was kind of like a moment in which it was executed so well, but it was kind of like in a staircase, and then something happened, and then which I'm not gonna spoil, but that moment made me jump. I gotta admit that it made me jump, but not once, but twice. Actually, the second time was a little bit by accident, because during the movie, despite being kind of like a little bit of a small slow burn, not kind of like not exactly kind of like this giant slow burn. For some reason, I was kind of feeling sleepy, and there was kind of like this scene in which it is rainy, there's storm, and all this stuff. There's thunderstorm. I was like that, and the funny thing is that I closed my eyes, feeling like I'm sleeping, and then a thunderstorm that sound comes, and I was like, and then I see and then I see kind of like a moment that should be scary, and I was like, oh, that was kind of hilarious, I gotta say. Jeez. Gee, with those scares. Okay. I think I talked very well enough about this movie to talk about it. Okay. I won't talk too much about the kind of like what the theme of the movie really is, because the movie eventually begins to make sense the more it put the pieces together. Some fit, some don't, but at the end of the day, it shows kind of like the loyalty of the dog to its owner, and kind of like in a horror way, and you legitimately feel bad for the dog. Not just because it's just a dog and it's cute, but you can that cinematography did some wonderful job to make us care, not only for him but also the owner. They go through all of this. They have some kind of like this paranormal stuff that is happening, but then you've kind of reached kind of like the kind of like, I think that the movie, despite its flaws, it really starts to pick up during the last minutes, where everything kind of begins to make some kind of sense, and I'm not gonna lie, that those moment is really emotional. They are emotional. I am. Oh my god. So yeah. Considering, and by the way, yes, like I said, that they don't use CGI dog, and thankfully also they don't use like, for example, Michael J. Fox to narrate the whole movie or something like that. I'm sorry, Homeward Bound. Unfortunately, this movie, that Homeward Bound, didn't age well for me. I'm sorry, it didn't age well. But unlike this movie, Good Boy, he really showcased he was a good boy, and I gotta applaud that there was a sense of ambition, but kind of like a more sincere ambition on how they're gonna handle this movie, and thankfully it kind of showcased it. Yeah, they treated the dog well. They work on it kind of like for 3 years, and well, the guy showcased his admiration to his own dog, to the point that he made a movie out of him, and it was cute. It's cute. This, I will say that some of my picks of horror movies of this year, at least 3 of them was big winners of best movies I have seen this year. I love the Final Destination was I really enjoyed. Also, Weapons was great, and now I have this, A Good Boy. Really, this year was kind of like a treat, my big treat.